Reinhard Heydrich, the so-called Butcher of Prague, had perished in June of 1942, yet the shadow he cast did not dissipate with his death. His widow, Lena, and their children remained tethered to the memory of one of the most feared figures of the Third Reich, long after the guns fell silent and the smoke of war faded. Germany had crumbled in 1945, leaving them dispossessed, unprotected, and stripped of the world they once inhabited under Hitler's regime. What followed were years of interrogation, legal battles, and life lived under names that many wish to forget. A life that demanded resilience, secrecy, and an understanding of a past too dangerous to openly acknowledge. Lena von Osten had first met Reinhard Heydrich in the early 1930s in a social club in Kiev, a union sparked by a combination of ambition, charm, and political ideology. Their early courtship unfolded in a time when loyalty to the rising Nazi movement could bring both prestige and peril. By 1931, Heydrich was already embroiled in accusations from military authorities for his support of Lena and other women, yet he continued to rise, eventually being released from the Navy by Admiral Erich Raeder in April of that year, a decision that would redirect his entire career path toward the political structures that would define him. The couple's partnership solidified rapidly. Lena's devotion to political ideals and her early association with the movement paved the way for Heydrich's ascension into the SS and the Sicherheitsdienst, where his ambition and disciplined mind quickly became apparent. By December of 1931, their familial and political partnership had begun to shape the trajectory not only of Heydrich's rise but also the lives of those around him, intertwining loyalty, danger, and power in a way that would echo for decades. In May of 1942, Heydrich assumed the role of acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, tasked with enforcing the most brutal security measures in Prague. That same month, Czech resistance fighters trained in Britain succeeded in ambushing his open vehicle en route to his office. Although Heydrich survived the initial explosion, he developed a serious infection after surgery, and despite efforts to stabilize him, his condition deteriorated rapidly. By December of 1942, he had died in Prague, leaving a vacuum of power and triggering a cascade of reprisals from Nazi authorities, an event that irrevocably changed the course of his family's life. For Lena and her children, the impact was immediate. The death of their father left his daughter, Lena, and her siblings, Klaus, Heider, Zilka, and Marta, grappling with a world that no longer recognized their status or offered protection. In the closing months of the war, Hitler himself had assured some measure of support, confirming their right to reside in the Jungfernbriesen estate, situated in occupied Czechoslovakia. This home, a symbol of Heydrich's SS rank and authority, became the center of the family's life throughout the remainder of the conflict, where they navigated existence with a sense of privilege mingled with isolation. Lena organized events for SS families and maintained social connections with Nazi elites, upholding the memory of her husband and the ideological world he had helped enforce. But as the war drew to a close and Soviet forces approached Prague, Lena and her children fled westward toward Bavaria, finding themselves among thousands of displaced German residents stripped of their homes. By the end of 1945, Lena and her children were settled in Aschau im Chiemgau, Bavaria, their circumstances a far cry from the status they had once held. The family relied on modest stipends, support from sympathetic relatives, and temporary accommodations provided by local authorities. The victory of Allied powers, combined with the denazification process, marked the beginning of a new chapter for Lena and her children, a chapter defined by bureaucracy, the restoration of identity, and the struggle to reconcile past allegiances with present realities. From 1946 onward, Lena navigated the complex legal and social landscape of post-war Bavaria, facing scrutiny over her early support of National Socialism, her marriage to a high-ranking SS official, and the material benefits she had enjoyed during the Third Reich. Tribunals examined her actions in depth, yet ultimately, Lena was classified as a Mitläuferin, a follower rather than an active supporter, allowing her to avoid severe penalties. Nevertheless, financial hardships persisted. The family had lost their property in Czechoslovakia, and Lena had no official state support at the time. Over the subsequent years, she gradually received recognition as a Mitläuferin, securing a pension under German law, a legal classification that sparked public debate. Critics argued that someone tied to one of the most feared officers of the regime should not benefit from state support. Yet the courts maintained that legal definitions, not moral judgment, dictated the outcome. If the details of Lena's resilience and survival intrigue you so far, do me one favor. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Click subscribe, give this video a like, and leave a comment to share where you're watching from. Every comment is read, and your support helps us bring more deep historical stories to light. Now let us continue back to the beginning to understand the life and legacy of a family shaped by history, ideology, and survival. By the end of 1945, Lena Heydrich and her children found themselves displaced in Bavaria, a region soon to fall under American occupation. The collapse of Germany had left them stripped of status, wealth, and security. The Jungfernbriesen estate, once a symbol of Reinhard Heydrich's authority within the SS, was no longer theirs, and with it went any shield of protection that had insulated them from the chaos engulfing post-war Europe. Settling into a Schau im Chiemgau, Lena relied on a modest stipend, the support of sympathetic relatives, and temporary housing arranged by local authorities. For a family once at the apex of Nazi elite society, their circumstances were a sharp reversal, an unyielding lesson in the fragility of privilege under the weight of history. The denazification process, initiated by Allied authorities to identify and penalize those connected to the Nazi regime, became central to Lena's life. From 1946 onward, she faced a series of tribunals designed to assess her role in the Third Reich. Investigators examined her marriage to Heydrich, her early affiliation with the Nazi Party in 1931, and the material advantages she had gained during the years of his ascendancy. Lena consistently presented herself as politically passive, claiming that her involvement was motivated by idealism rather than active complicity. The courts, while thorough in their inquiries, ultimately classified her as a Mitläuferin, a follower rather than an instigator or supporter. This legal distinction allowed her to avoid significant penalties, but did little to erase the social and moral complexities attached to her past. The late 1940s were a period of gradual adjustment. Lena sought to rebuild not only her life, but also the sense of dignity and stability that had been lost with the fall of the Reich. Her pension, granted under German law despite controversy, provided a modest source of financial stability. Public debate continued regarding the propriety of her receiving benefits, given her late husband's notorious position within the SS. Critics argued that a woman so closely tied to the inner circle of one of history's most feared security officials should not enjoy state support, while legal authorities maintained that the decision adhered strictly to existing legislation rather than moral judgment. The tension between law and ethics, between public perception and private necessity, defined much of Lena's post-war experience. Lena's children faced their own unique challenges. Klaus, the eldest, had tragically died in October of 1943 in a bus accident, leaving a permanent void in the family's life. The remaining children, Heider, Zilka, and Marta, struggled to reconcile their father's legacy with their need for normalcy in a radically changed world. Heider, who would later pursue a career in engineering, sought privacy and distance from public attention, deliberately avoiding interviews and public discussion of his father's actions during the war. Silke's life remains less documented, with unconfirmed reports suggesting that she may have relocated to the United States, though no verified sources confirm her movements. Marta, who would later take the name Baya, remained on the island of Fehmarn in northern Germany, managing a small shop and keeping her life deliberately private. She, too, avoided public interviews, expressing little knowledge or concern about her father's infamous role, emphasizing instead her desire for ordinary existence. The process of denazification also offered Lena a pathway to social reintegration. By the early 1950s, she had completed the formal stages of the program, regaining legal rights to work, travel, and access state support. With her pension and the legal clearance afforded by her classification, Lena began to reconstruct her life in a manner that balanced the practicalities of survival with the lingering shadow of history. She relocated to the island of Fehmarn, where she established a guest house named Pension Embrya. This establishment became both a source of livelihood and a hub for social engagement, connecting her with tourists, locals, and a small network of acquaintances who had known her prior to 1945. Despite her outwardly ordinary life, Lena maintained connections to families associated with former SS elites, reflecting a loyalty to her late husband's memory and the world they had once inhabited together. Her public persona, often portrayed in interviews conducted by journalists such as Nancy Doherty in the 1970s and 80s, presented her as a steadfast and principled woman, one whose memory of Reinhard Heydrich was precise and unwavering. Lena's accounts, however selective, highlighted the tension inherent in navigating a post-war identity as the widow of a figure synonymous with terror. Scholars debated the reliability and interpretation of her testimonies, noting that while they offered insight into the private experiences of Heydrich's family, they often blurred the lines between personal memory and historical fact. By the mid to late 1970s, Lena's memoir, titled Life with a War Criminal, garnered immediate attention. The book presented her perspective on life with Heydrich, emphasizing his personal qualities while downplaying or justifying the broader implications of his actions within the RSHA and the Third Reich. Critics accused her of selective memory, arguing that the narrative sought to recast her husband in a more sympathetic light, yet supporters contended that it offered valuable personal context for understanding the domestic and familial dimensions of one of history's most feared figures. Public interest in Lena's life remained high, particularly as journalists and historians traveled to Fehmarn for interviews, documenting her experiences and perspectives in a period when direct testimony from former Nazi families was increasingly rare. The denazification process, her legal status, and her memoirs collectively shaped Lena Heydrich's post-war identity. They allowed her a measure of financial stability and social reintegration, while simultaneously exposing her to scrutiny and controversy. Through these experiences, Lena and her children navigated the delicate balance between personal survival, public perception, and historical accountability. Each decision, whether to speak publicly, to maintain privacy, or to engage with former SS associates, was influenced by the enduring legacy of Reinhard Heydrich and the complex moral landscape of post-war Germany. The children of Reinhard Heydrich grew up in a world dramatically altered from the one their father had known. By 1945, with Germany defeated and the family displaced in Bavaria, Lena's children faced the dual burden of personal loss and the weight of public history. The eldest, Heide, having survived the chaos of war, focused on education, determined to forge a life removed from the shadows of his father's infamous legacy. He completed his schooling quietly, avoiding publicity and any association with discussions about the Third Reich. His choice reflected both a desire for personal privacy and a conscious rejection of the narrative that had defined his father's reputation. Silke, the second daughter, remains an enigmatic figure in historical records. Some sources suggest that she emigrated to the United States in the early 1950s, seeking anonymity and distance from Europe's post-war reckoning. These claims, however, remain largely unverified, and Zilke's life, in contrast to her siblings, appears intentionally obscured from public view. Her decision to remove herself from the historical spotlight demonstrates a clear attempt to navigate a personal path unburdened by the notoriety of her family name. Marta, the youngest, would later take the name Bayer and remained on the northern German island of Fehmarn. She assumed responsibility for the small family property, managing a modest shop that catered to locals and visitors alike. Marta's approach to life was quiet and deliberate. She rarely gave interviews and spoke little of her father. When pressed, she admitted that she had never truly known him, and that the concept of Reinhard Heydrich existed to her largely as a historical figure, a distant and almost mythical presence rather than a personal memory. Marta's perspective exemplifies the challenge faced by the children, growing up with a father whose legacy was infamous while attempting to construct an ordinary existence. Heydrich, in particular, chose a career far removed from public attention, becoming an engineer in northern Germany. Despite decades of historical inquiry into the life of his father, Heydrich avoided interviews and refrained from public commentary. When approached by historians and journalists, he declined participation, emphasizing his commitment to privacy and the desire to live independently of the past that had defined his family. His stance highlighted the enduring tension between personal agency and historical legacy, demonstrating how the offspring of prominent figures in history can be inexorably linked to events in which they had no agency. The public's fascination with the Heydrich family did not dissipate, however. Journalists and researchers frequently sought access, particularly in the 1970s and 80s, when interviews with Lena and her children became a focus of historical inquiry. One notable account, conducted by Nancy Dougherty, documented Lena's firm defense of her late husband and the perspective she maintained on her family's role in history. The interviews painted a complex picture of loyalty, memory, and the navigation of moral accountability in post-war Germany. While Lena's accounts were precise in recalling personal details, they were often selective, focusing on intimate recollections while minimizing the broader impact of Heydrich's actions within the SS and the RSHA. The children, observing these interviews and the attention their mother attracted, often opted for silence. Their decisions underscore the difficulties faced by the descendants of individuals implicated in historical atrocities, negotiating between personal privacy and societal interest, between the demands of memory and the necessity of moving forward. While Lena actively engaged with journalists, framing the narrative of her family's life, her children prioritized anonymity, choosing to construct lives defined more by ordinary experience than historical notoriety. Heydrich's occasional public statements, particularly in the early 21st century, reveal a protective stance toward family memory. In 2009, he agreed to speak with historian John Martin regarding the operation known as Anthropoid, which had led to his father's assassination in Prague in 1942. Even in this rare interview, Heydrich maintained a defensive posture, emphasizing his father's personal qualities while steering clear of justifications for his political or military actions. Similarly, in 2011, Heydrich participated in efforts to support the restoration of the family home in Püsnek, Praha. This initiative generated significant controversy in the Czech Republic, where public memory of Heydrich remains fraught and sensitive. Local officials and historians expressed concern that such restoration efforts might glorify a figure widely remembered for terror and repression. Marta's life, though less publicly scrutinized, also reflects the challenges of navigating legacy. Remaining on Fehmarn, she chose to create a self-contained, quiet life, managing a small business and avoiding public engagement. Marta's decision to withhold personal commentary illustrates a generational response to historical infamy, a desire to reclaim personal agency and craft a life defined by ordinary human experiences, rather than the shadow of a parent's notoriety. The divergent paths taken by Heydrich, Zilke, and Marta exemplify the broader struggle faced by children of historical figures implicated in atrocities. They highlight the tension between inherited notoriety and the pursuit of individual identity. Each child responded differently. Heydrich pursued professional work in relative isolation, Zilka reportedly sought life abroad, and Marta cultivated a quiet domestic existence. Collectively, their experiences illustrate the enduring impact of historical legacy on personal identity, the weight of societal expectations, and the strategies employed to navigate a world that constantly links them to events and actions they did not choose. In the end, the Heydrich children's lives reflect resilience, adaptation, and the complex moral and social landscapes that follow historical trauma. They offer insight into how the descendants of notorious figures attempt to reconcile the past with the demands of the present, balancing the need for privacy with the inescapable attention of history. Their stories underscore the lasting influence of a father's actions, the protective instincts of a mother navigating denazification and social reintegration, and the intricate ways in which memory, identity, and history converge in the lives of those left in the shadow of one of the Third Reich's most infamous figures. As the decades progressed, Lena Heydrich continued to live on the island of Fehmarn, quietly navigating a life shaped by the consequences of history and the shadow of her husband's legacy. By the 1970s, she had largely completed the formal processes of denazification, legally permitted to work, travel, and receive government support. Yet, despite this reintegration into German society, Lena's existence remained deeply entwined with the memory of Reinhard Heydrich. She retained her small pension, granted under Bavarian law, a recognition of her late husband's official status within the Third Reich, though it was not without controversy. Critics argued that someone so closely connected to one of the regime's most feared figures should not benefit from state provisions, yet legal frameworks prevailed over moral judgment, granting her relative stability in a country still wrestling with its past. Lena's later years were marked by her engagement with the local community and the small network she had cultivated through her guest house, the Pension Embryo. This modest establishment became a hub for visitors, locals, and occasionally historians seeking insight into the life of Reinhard Heydrich and his family. Through this work, Lena maintained a sense of purpose, though she carefully curated the narratives she shared. She remained steadfast in portraying her family as victims of circumstance, emphasizing the personal losses endured during and after the war, while minimizing or avoiding discussion of her husband's active role in the machinery of Nazi terror. Public interest in Lena intensified in the 1970s and 80s, when journalists and historians visited Fehmarn to conduct interviews. In one notable interview, later referred to as Interview with the Hangman's Wife, Lena spoke with precise memory and unwavering confidence, recounting the details of her life and marriage. Her accounts were both meticulous and selective, focusing on personal experiences while reframing or softening the historical implications of her husband's actions. Scholars debated whether her narrative was an accurate reflection of personal memory or a deliberate act of self-representation, an attempt to reconcile loyalty to her late husband with the moral reckoning of post-war Germany. The children of Lena, meanwhile, had by now firmly established paths of relative anonymity. Heide, the eldest surviving child, continued his work as an engineer in northern Germany, largely avoiding public scrutiny and interviews. His sporadic engagement with historians, such as the rare interview with John Martin in 2009, demonstrated a careful navigation between family loyalty and historical responsibility. Heydrich expressed a protective stance toward his father's memory, emphasizing personal qualities while avoiding justification of political or military actions, reflecting the complex position of children living in the shadow of infamous parental legacies. Marta, living as Baya on Fehmarn, maintained a quiet domestic life, managing her shop and occasionally interacting with visitors to the island. She refused to discuss her father publicly, emphasizing instead her desire for privacy and normalcy. Zilka's whereabouts and life choices remain largely undocumented, with some unverified reports suggesting she emigrated to the United States. Collectively, the children's decisions illustrate the varied ways descendants of historical figures attempt to reconcile identity, privacy, and societal interest. They highlight the enduring impact of a parent's notoriety on personal development and life choices. Lena's health began to decline in the early 1980s, though she remained active in her guest house and local community as long as possible. Despite advancing age, she continued to receive visitors, including journalists and researchers, and remained vocal in defending her perspective on her family's past. Her memoir, Life with a War Criminal, published in 1976, attracted attention and criticism alike. Critics argued that Lena presented a selective, sanitized account of Reinhard Heydrich, emphasizing personal qualities and minimizing or omitting his participation in systemic atrocities. Supporters claimed the memoir provided valuable insight into the private life of a family living in the shadow of historical infamy, offering a human dimension often absent from purely historical accounts. On the 14th of August 1985, Lena Heydrich passed away at the age of 73. Her death marked the closing of a chapter that had spanned the rise and fall of the Third Reich, the immediate post-war denazification period, and decades of societal and familial adaptation. Public response to her death was muted but reflective, acknowledging both her unique position as the widow of one of Nazi Germany's most feared figures and the controversies surrounding her memoir and public statements. Historians continue to debate her legacy, questioning the extent to which her accounts represent historical truth versus personal reinterpretation, and what her life reveals about post-war Germany's engagement with memory, responsibility, and justice. The legacy of Reinhard Heydrich's children further underscores the complexities of historical memory. Heider, Marta, and Zilka pursued lives that largely rejected public confrontation with their father's past, seeking anonymity and personal agency. Their choices reflect the enduring tension between private identity and historical notoriety, illustrating how children of notorious figures must navigate societal expectations, moral scrutiny, and the psychological weight of inheritance. While their mother actively engaged in shaping the family narrative, the children's preference for discretion underscores a generational shift toward private reconciliation rather than public defense. In the broader historical context, the Heydrich family's post-war experiences provide insight into the multifaceted processes of denazification, legal rehabilitation, and social reintegration in Germany. Lena's ability to receive a pension, maintain a household, and eventually engage publicly illustrates the complexities of post-war justice, where legal frameworks sometimes conflicted with public and moral sentiment. The children's paths reflect the human consequences of historical infamy, offering a lens through which historians examine the intersections of personal memory, societal judgment, and the long shadow of totalitarian regimes. Ultimately, the story of Lena Heydrich and her children serves as a case study in the interplay between history, memory, and identity. It highlights the challenges faced by those who inherit the legacies of controversial figures, the strategies they employ to navigate societal scrutiny, and the ongoing debates surrounding historical accountability. The Heydrich family's narrative, spanning decades, locations, and generations, remains a testament to the enduring impact of the past on personal lives, the complex ethics of remembrance, and the intricate dance between private experience and public history.